This victory is a win for the world's largest democracy.
Apart from Modi, there is no contender. Modi is coming back.
Everybody expected it to go in one direction, but that is not happening.
The country has unanimously and clearly stated, we do not want Mr. Narendra Modi.
I didn't want religion-based politics this time.
The narratives and the issues are quite different.
In our third term, India will write a new chapter of big decisions.
So that is what Tuesday looked like in India, the culmination of 6 weeks of voting to select a new Prime Minister. And the result, the new Prime Minister is most likely going to be the old Prime Minister. Narendra Modi is most likely going to be forming another government, a third consecutive term. But what will that mean for Indian foreign policy moving forward? That is what we're looking at on News Desk today, which, as you all know, is a DW News conversation that takes questions, comments and observations from you and throws them into the discussion and to our experts. I'm Firesh Banerjee.
And I'm Melissa Chan. I'll be paying particular attention to what's happening in chat, picking up on your comments and questions and bringing them to the table here.
So today we're looking to answer the question, what can the world expect from India in the aftermath of these elections? And these have been elections like no other, because even though Prime Minister Narendra Modi appears to have enough numbers on his side through a coalition to form a government, but his BJP party is going to form a government with a reduced majority. And will that have an impact on the way Indian foreign policy works out in the next few years is going to be a factor we're going to be discussing today on this discussion.
Yeah, and I'm already seeing some early comments that were posted right before the live stream started happening, just to share and get things going. 17 Perez says, what happens in India matters worldwide. India is overcrowded, the most populated country in the world. Are tensions rising against Pakistan with the possibility of going nuclear? What is India doing to fight climate change? Those types of issues matter and people want to know about them. We also have another comment from JHawk0047. Though there will be change in domestic policy, the international approach will be the same, as the opposition parties rarely go against the foreign policy. So we'll be examining that. So keep those comments going. I also want to take the opportunity to introduce everyone around the table. We have DW journalist Jared Reed with us. He's going to be contributing some of his thoughts and setting up the conversation, really. And across from me is Cherry Chan, who you'll find hanging out in chat. She'll be posting links and addressing any comments and questions as well. So the two of us will be working together. And you'll also hear us possibly reference Wade Adams. He's our show producer in the control room, not around the table, but running things, along with the awesome technical team we have inside.
And later on in this discussion, you'll be hearing from three experts on three different issues. Firstly, we'll be talking to Michael Kugelman, who'll be joining us from Washington, D.C. If I'm not wrong, he'll be talking about India and its immediate neighborhood, India's relations with Pakistan and China. Then we'll be looking at India's relations with EU. Garima Mohan will be joining us from Brussels to talk about that. And lastly, we'll be talking about India and its relations with the United States. Moving forward, Manoj Joshi will be joining us from Delhi. That's later in the program. You'd like to stay tuned for these experts. They know what they're talking about.
Yeah, and of course, we want your questions and comments. And just to sort of kick things off and get everyone engaged, we decided to come up with a poll question. I know, Cherry, you'll present that.
Yeah. So the poll question today, what relationship matters most to India? We have four options: India, US, India, Russia, India, EU, or India, China. You can find the poll on the very top of your chat box.
Right. We shall have the results of that, I think, later on in the stream. I think people have already started voting, but maybe it's best not to give out the result now. We don't want to prejudice people. So send us your results. We shall have that later in the thing. I'm actually quite curious as to what people are going to say, especially when it comes to the first two choices, India, US versus India, Russia. Quite curious about that one. But let's get things started and begin with a quick recap in case you were busy for some reason yesterday. Let's just bring you a quick recap of what yesterday looked like in India and what exactly went down in the largest democracy on the planet. Jared is going to help us understand that.
Yeah, it's always interesting when elections happen, I guess, to compare the before and the after in terms of the commentary and the prediction and the analysis. Of course, before the election, a lot of analysts had predicted that Narendra Modi would come out with more of a resounding victory. But of course, what we're seeing after the fact is that his own BJP, as you say, has lost its own absolute majority for the first time since Narendra Modi came to power a decade ago. His coalition has secured a majority, but of course a much reduced one. And I can show you kind of exactly what that looks like in practical terms. So what you're seeing now is how things looked like after the 2019 election. So the National Democratic Alliance, highlighted here in orange, of which the BJP is a part of. This is how things stand now. So you can really see the losses for the NDA and, I guess, too, the gains that have been made at its own expense. Is this a setback for Narendra Modi? Well, a lot of people are saying that, but of course that's not something he's admitting to. He is calling it a historical feat because, as you say, he's only the second Indian leader to win a third consecutive term, most likely, those two words, as you said at the beginning of the show, Biresh. But it's obviously a lot more complicated than that. I was speaking earlier to Shalu Yadav, who's our correspondent in Delhi. She was reading out on the news to me this morning some of the newspaper headlines. I'm going to show one of them to you right now from the Telegraph in India, and someone has tweeted a copy of this front page, and it says, "India cuts Modi down." So that's, I guess, some of the sentiment that is running through the country today. As you say, Modi is expected to return to power, but the big caveat is that he's going to have to do so with the help of coalition partners. That's a tricky situation in any country. We know that here in Germany, how coalition talks and negotiations go down, but it's particularly tricky for someone who's not necessarily used to governing like that, like Narendra Modi. He's going to have to start listening to other people. So we have that aspect, and we also have the aspect of a strengthened opposition, as that map showed, and what impact that's going to have over particularly the next little while.
Thanks very much for that, Jared. It's those two aspects, a reduced majority and a strengthened opposition, which means that Narendra Modi can't just do whatever potentially he would like to do. And that is something that we would need to discuss. But let's start talking about the three regions we had teased at the very start of this program. Let's talk about India's immediate neighborhood and expand that to what that means for India's immediate neighbors, Pakistan and China. To help us do that, we have with us Michael Kugelman. He is the director of the South Asia Institute at the Wilson Center. Michael, it is good to see you. Thanks for making the time. We are going to dive into a discussion with you, but before that, I think I'd just like to play, and maybe Wade can help me here. I'd like to play a soundbite from what Rajnath Singh, India's outgoing defense minister, said in an interview to a television channel just 2 weeks before the voting process began. And I think it is quite remarkable for what he was saying, and explains where India sees itself in terms of relations with Pakistan. I'd like to play that soundbite, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about it. Okay, Michael?
If any terrorist from the neighboring country tries to hurt India, we will give a befitting response. If he runs away back to Pakistan, then we will kill him by entering into Pakistan.
And those comments created quite a storm, because you had the Defense Minister of India saying that, well, we will carry out targeted assassinations in Pakistan after a report that said that India had carried out targeted assassinations in Pakistan. Michael, how do you view this? Is this the kind of sentiment that will extend into a third Modi term, or will we see a bit of an altered sentiment when it comes to Pakistan?
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me. Keep in mind that those comments that the outgoing defense minister made came, right in the middle of the election, and we have seen certainly in the 2019 election that the BJP has calculated that it pays off politically to talk tough on Pakistan. So I think we need to keep that context in mind. But indeed, we have seen the most recent Modi government take a hard line on Pakistan. What can we expect for Modi 3.0? I think just make a very broad point before I get to your question. there's been a lot of talk that Modi is now going to be, for the first time, having to work within a coalition government, and might that impact his policy agenda? And I would argue that his foreign policy agenda will be much less impacted than his domestic policy agenda. And that is because I imagine that his coalition partners will see eye to eye with him on most of his foreign policy goals, where it would be a bit of a different story with domestic policy goals, whether you're talking about Hindu nationalism related agendas or economic reforms. So I think that's an important, broader point to put out there. In terms of Pakistan, I would argue that we're going to see more of the same from Modi in his third term. And what we've seen to this point has been a desire not to let the relationship with Pakistan get out of control. And keep in mind that in 2021, India concluded a new truce with Pakistan on the disputed border, the line of control. And that was because India was keen to ensure that its relationship with Pakistan not get overly tense and not spiral out of control because of its desire to focus more attention on China, which I know we'll get to. So that's one key point. I expect that Modi will not want to try to stir this pot with Pakistan, but at the same time, I don't expect him to want to extend an olive branch to Pakistan. I think that Modi concluded after he made a surprise visit to Pakistan early on in his first term, at the end of 2015, he made a surprise trip to Pakistan to meet with the Prime Minister of Pakistan at the time. Several days after he got back to India, there was a horrible terrorist attack on Indian troops that was traced back to Pakistan-sponsored terrorists. And I think that is simply, given that, I don't think that Modi would have any interest in wanting to try to make things better with Pakistan. There's been some noises in Pakistan in recent months that there may be a desire to explore reopening some border trade with India. I don't think India would be interested even in that.
Is the onus entirely on Pakistan if they want to, if ties between the two neighbors are to improve, given that it was Pakistan that downgraded diplomatic ties after August 2019, after India withdrew the autonomous status of the Indian part of Kashmir? Does the onus lie on Pakistan?
Well, I mean, I think it lies on both of them. There's a fundamental challenge here to moving this relationship forward. And this was true before India's election, and it's going to be true after it as well. And that is that each side has essentially imposed conditions for formal dialogue that aren't going to be met, right? So India has insisted, and Modi will continue to insist, that Pakistan do more to deal with the issue of Pakistan-based and Pakistan-sponsored terrorists that threaten India. India's view is that Pakistan has not adequately cracked down on that problem, whereas Pakistan has been saying that there's nothing there, that Pakistan has done everything that needs to be done. But Pakistan has insisted, and I think will continue to insist once Modi is back in power, that India needs to change its policies in Kashmir. Pakistan rejected Modi's decision in 2019 to revoke the special autonomous status of Jammu and Kashmir, India-administered Kashmir. And Pakistan wants India to reverse that reversal, so to speak. India is not going to do that. Modi is absolutely not going to do that. And all of his coalition partners would agree with him. The opposition would be with him on that. So this is why, unfortunately, well, at least for those that would like to see the relationship in a bit of a better place, I just see it in a bit of a paralyzed state. I describe the state of the relationship now as one of a cold peace. As I said before, neither side wants it to get worse, but at the same time, I don't think there's any strong incentive on either side for the relationship to get that much better.
And I just want to share some comments that's been coming in from Carolina Vilena, who says, regardless of election results, every country in the world will be affected by relations with India. Sachin has a comment about India and China saying that they should become friends if possible to handle Western countries trying to meddle in Asia. Well, that's going to be an interesting challenge. And then there's a question, I think, Michael, that you kind of already addressed, but from Kushagra Bardwaj. Michael, do you see the ongoing ceasefire with Pakistan holding for the foreseeable future?
Yeah, maybe that's something that you can answer, Michael.
Yeah, that's a good question. Unfortunately, I don't have a crystal ball, so I can't say. But it has been quite striking that in the 3+ years since it was concluded, the LOC, the line of control, the disputed border, it has remained fairly quiet. And as I said before, well, I didn't speak that much about the Pakistan side of this. Both countries want to do what they can to ensure things don't spiral out of control. India wants to be able to focus its attention on the China challenge. Pakistan has all kinds of internal challenges, including its economy and resurging terrorism from the Pakistan Taliban. So neither side has an interest in seeing that truce undermined or broken. So that suggests that neither side would want there to be stepped up cross-border violence or anything like that. But again, this is even in the best of times, this relationship is a fragile one. And, all it would take is a terrorist attack in India that's traced back to Pakistan, or that India traces back to Pakistan, and then you could have a fresh crisis.
Where is the Pakistani military establishment on this, Michael? Given that I think it was General Bajwa in his final few months, I think there were some overtures he was trying to make to India to try and normalize ties, but then I think that's sort of disappeared in the din of the political crisis that eventually engulfed Pakistan. How does the Pakistani military see this?
And my sense is that the Pakistani military is genuinely open to looking at the possibility of a better relationship. But I go back to what I said about the Kashmir issue. You hear, and I have heard for many years, Pakistani military officers and officials describe Kashmir as Pakistan's jugular vein, in the sense that in their view, it's a critical part of Pakistan, which obviously is not India's view. And so that gets to what I said before about how I think that, the Pakistani military, which at the end of the day has the final say, and in many cases every say in policies towards India and Kashmir, it is not going to be willing to move forward or want to try to move forward until there are changes in India's policies in Kashmir, which, as I've argued, are not going to happen. In terms of trade, it was the civilian leadership in Pakistan that has been making noises about wanting to restore trade with India. And honestly, I don't even know. I'm not sure if the military would want to see even that modest step. You have a situation in Pakistan where generally the civilian and the military leadership at this point are seeing eye to eye. But I think that's one area that the civilians may want to push a bit more on the issue of exploring more trade. But I think that the military would take a tougher line on that issue.
Just on the point of Kashmir, Pakistan wanting India to sort of reverse its decision in relation to Kashmir from 2019, and India firm in the idea that Pakistan should do more when it comes to alleged terrorism emanating from Pakistani soil. This just seems to be a deadlock. And I don't know, I don't seem to be able to see a way forward. And from the way you describe it as a cold peace, it appears that we are going to be in this situation for years to come until somebody gives, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think that you'd have to look to a situation where you have a new type of leadership in either or both countries that are willing to move past or try to get around this paralysis. And, as you know, there have been a few peace initiatives that have come out over the years. And, perhaps most famously, Pervez Musharraf, when he was in power, he tried to pursue a peace track with India, but it didn't work for a number of reasons. One reason being the Mumbai terrorist attacks, when you had Lashkar-e-Taiba, a Pakistan-sponsored terrorist group, carry out a horrific massacre in Mumbai. So yeah, I think that you need to look to a longer term scenario where there's a very different type of leadership in place in both countries.
I'd like to bring in maybe the China factor here, and this is where I'd like to sort of segue into talking about China. One of Pakistan's closest allies is China, and China and India do not really see eye to eye. Is it the China factor here, and China, in a sense, being on the side of Pakistan and being so closely allied with Pakistan, that gives Pakistan the assurance that it doesn't really need to improve ties with India?
Yeah, that's part of it. Yes, Pakistan is fortunate from its perspective that China has its back, so to speak, and despite a bit of bumps in the Pakistan-China relationship in recent years and really in recent months. I think that it's quite clear that China has a very compelling interest in maintaining a strong alliance with Pakistan, which includes significant levels of support, including military assistance. And at the end of the day, this is what ensures a continued robust China-Pakistan relationship. There are shared concerns about India. But I would argue that Pakistan has a number of reasons why it takes the position it does. But yeah, absolutely, knowing that China has its back is a key one.
Michael, there's a question coming in from somebody in the chat, Dineshwar Reddy, saying, how do you see the relationship between China and India changing in Modi's third term? Is there going to be a big departure from the second term?
Yeah, I think that, and you know, I would have said this before the election, before we knew what would happen. I think that Modi is going to prioritize China in his foreign policy. I think it's going to be one of his biggest foreign policy goals will be to strengthen India's capacity to deter China. Just because Modi can point to a lot of foreign policy successes over his first two terms. You know, landing on the moon, you know, becoming a key player in issues involving the global South, and so on. You know, strengthening India's role in the global stage on the whole. But, you know, China has been a challenge. And, you know, Modi would not admit this publicly, but India cannot stop China. China has been able to stage incursions periodically across the border. And there are indications that even now, China has a presence in some areas of India that India considers its own territory. And it's not just that. China has developed an unprecedented presence, footprint, influence around South Asia. And also, if you look at Chinese naval power projection in the Western Indian Ocean region, and, you know, this is India's broader maritime backyard. This is all very concerning for India and for Modi. So I think that he's going to want to focus on that. The question is, how does he do that? You know, there have been frequent negotiations since the border clash in 2020 between India and China, the worst, deadliest border clash in years. There have been high-level meetings between the militaries on both sides. I imagine Modi will want to see that continue to try to keep temperatures down on the border. But I think here we get to an issue that I know you'll discuss later in your program, and that's India's relationship with the U.S. I think Modi will recognize in his third term that if you want to do more to strengthen India's capacity to deter China, particularly on the border, you need to step up security ties with the U.S. even more. We've seen stepped up intelligence cooperation between the U.S. and India, which in one case at least actually helped India intercept, or should I say preempt, a potential Chinese incursion into India. But yes, this will be a big priority for Modi. I think that he's going to have to figure out what to do about this fact that India does not have the capacity at this point to deter Chinese power projection. How does he strengthen India's capacity to deal with that issue?
Michael, really quickly, this is a question from Raj Nigam in chat. Will China and India's trade decrease due to the situation right now? Yeah, I mean, could you put that in context? The two countries actually do a fair bit of trading, and I don't know if it's decreasing or increasing. If you could shed light on that, it would have an influence on the geopolitical element.
Right. Yeah. One reason why the India-China relationship is such an interesting one is that it's a case where even when security or strategic relations are a real mess, trade has been quite strong and robust. Many observers thought that would change after the Ladakh border clash, which again sunk relations to their lowest level since the two countries went to war in the 1960s. But what happened is that immediately after that crisis, Modi announced that dozens of Chinese apps were being banned in India, and those bans continue to be in place. But whereas we've seen significant reductions of Chinese FDI in India since that border clash, we have continued to see robust levels of trade, which is quite striking. And if you look at the recent bilateral trade volume figures, India-China trade volume has not been far off from India-US trade volume. And that's saying something because India-US trade volume has picked up a lot. So I think that in Modi's third term, absolutely, I think that he will look to continue commercial relations with China. Which would be continuity with what we saw in the last few years of his second term.
At this point, I'd just like to sort of bring in how the Chinese government reacted to the results that emerged from India on Tuesday. I'd just like to play a soundbite from the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning, and let's just play that and then pick that up after that.
We note the Indian election results and congratulate the victory of Prime Minister Modi and his National Democratic Alliance. A healthy and stable China-India relationship is in both our interest and conducive to peace and development in the region and the world.
Michael, how sincere is China when China makes that offer and that claim?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I think those comments should be taken in the broader context of all of these world leaders and governments that have been congratulating Modi, even though his new government hasn't even been sworn in yet. It's quite striking. I think says something about how significant India is in global affairs, and also how significant a figure Modi is and will continue to be as perceived by the world despite his smaller mandate. Well, look, I think that the big question now is in terms of how China might respond to this new situation in India. Will it try to test Modi, knowing that he's going to be in a bit of a more constrained state? He's going to be in a coalition. He's not going to have as much political space. Might China try to test him by perhaps trying to stage an incursion? We can't rule that out. Or will it try to propose other things? Will it propose talks, different types of negotiations? This all remains to be seen. But, it is interesting here that we've heard during the last few weeks of the second Modi term, we heard Modi and several other officials say that basically this relationship with China cannot be normal until we resolve the border issue. But China has taken the opposite position and say that we need to move beyond the border issue and look for areas of cooperation beyond that. So how Modi tries to navigate that difference in his third term, I think will be very interesting in the coming days.
I thought you were going to ask a question or something.
Oh.
All right. No, it is. So it's basically India going to be responding to China, China calling the shots and China determining which way this relationship goes. Is that right?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
It's going to be China that's going to be determining where this relationship goes and not so much India?
Well, I mean, if you look at the power symmetry, some may disagree with me. I think you could nitpick at this, but given the broader power dynamics at play, China, it does have significant military advantages, particularly along the border. And as I say, it does have the capacity to stage incursions. And India has been unable to preempt them, though it's gotten a bit better at that, particularly as intelligence sharing with the U.S. has improved. But I think that for the third Modi term, I think they want to turn that narrative around and say, well, look, we're going to take steps and do what we need to do to push back on China. And India has got a lot of powerful friends on this front that want to work with it, whether the U.S. or its other Quad partners, its European partners. Mm-hmm. So I think it's going to get a lot of help in that regard. But again, it's going to be very difficult because China, it's going to continue to pursue its wolf warrior diplomacy, so to speak. And that wolf warrior diplomacy, I think, also plays out along the border with India.
We'll leave it there for the moment. I know, Michael, you have a hard deadline coming up in, I think, under 3 minutes. But thanks so much for making the time for this discussion. We'll catch up on another day, perhaps talking about other neighbors that India is having to deal with. Thanks so much for today, Michael.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks for having me. Take care.
And now just seemed like a good time to maybe have a look at how the chat has been playing out, because I think Sherry's been monitoring that.
Totally. It's been very interesting.
Yeah, I see that people are making conversation with themselves in the chat, and I think this is really nice that people are talking to each other.
I saw a bit of that. I couldn't see all of it because I was listening to Michael, but I did see a bit of that.
Yeah, I
think it's nice when we can bring people together, right, in the chat.
Exactly. Yeah, and people have very strong opinions about Modi's win. I think in general people are quite positive about Modi's win and the future of foreign relations for India. There is one particular comment that I find quite interesting, that one comment says that China and India trade surpassed last year numbers, and then they think that China and India, they will not be rival to each other. And I think people have quite a lot to say about China and India relations.
I'd like to say something about India-China relations. Actually, I have a question for you, for anybody who wants to answer it. You go back to that incident in 2020, when 20 Indian soldiers were killed and potentially 4 or more than that Chinese soldiers killed in that incident in Galwan. I think we have a map as well of that northern border that we were talking about. Maybe Wade can throw that up just so people know, have a reference point as to where we're talking about. We were talking about Ladakh. This is in the north of India. So basically the line that you will see, there you go, that line all the way from the north of India all the way to the east, that's the entire disputed border with China. And this clash happened further towards where Kashmir is. That's that shaded part in the north. I don't think anybody's quite clear as to why China suddenly moved troops into a part that India was claiming. I mean, what are your guesses as to why that happened?
Yeah, and I mean, this is among analysts who study China, they're very confused about the timing of it, right? It just seemed to and again, with the way the Chinese government system is, it's an authoritarian state. People have been spending years trying to parse the thinking behind Xi Jinping's decision-making, but it did seem to have happened sort of with no real sort of trigger. It just suddenly happened. And we also know, of course, that China has been making incursions in Bhutan a little bit, and there's very little covered. I think the analysis is that people don't know why. But what we've seen generally, though, is an expansion of its borders, right? Trying to push beyond its borders. We see it with the actions of China and Beijing in Hong Kong, with Taiwan, in the Philippines, a little bit with Japan. And so in some ways, if you look at it thematically, it comes as no surprise. In terms of why it's happening at that particular time, anybody's guess.
And it's so smack dab in the middle of the COVID crisis. It was at a time, because if you look at in the years leading up to it, India was doing its best to improve ties with Beijing. There was this bonhomie that was developing between Xi Jinping and Narendra Modi. This is the second term of the Narendra Modi government. So when this happened, it caught everybody off guard. And I remember speaking to analysts in India, and even they were scratching their head. We said, we do not know why this has happened, and we still don't know.
It's a self-own in some senses, because it's put India on notice in terms of regarding China in a very fundamentally different way. It's meant India has developed better relations for the United States, which we'll be talking about later. But also, just in terms of being more guarded when there was an opportunity to improve relations, improve trade, and not have, for example, TikTok banned in India, rather, the way it has been.
But could it be because that India was getting closer to the United States? India is a strategic partner. It's not technically an ally. But could it be that this was a way of China sort of, showing India its, for lack of a better phrasing, its place, and saying that, well, we are the big guns in Asia? I don't know.
And maybe it's a bit of, I think you said the word opportunity. It's using opportunities, but then Michael was just saying too, whether China's going to use this particular moment of Modi being slightly more politically vulnerable in having to deal with coalitions and all of those kinds of distractions that he didn't have before. What might China do while he's having to deal with that? So.
Yeah, we'll never know. It's an enduring mystery, but it's just worth discussing it every now and then. But let's move beyond India's immediate neighborhood and expand it to another region of the world, the European Union.
Keep those questions coming.
Keep those questions and comments coming, because we'd like to talk about relations between India and the European Union now. And to help us do that, we're joined by Garima Mohan from the German Marshall Fund of the United States, who's been listening patiently to everything that we've been saying, and hopefully, and I'm sure she has an opinion on everything that we've been discussing. Garima, thanks so much for making the time, joining us from Brussels. Garima is one of the foremost experts looking at ties between India and the European Union. So we're very honored that you've been able to make the time. We'll get into talking about that relationship in just a moment, Garima, but just for the benefit of everybody who's tuning in to this stream, I'd just like to play a soundbite from European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. She said she was in India in 2022 attending the Raisina dialogue. I think you were there as well, Garima, if I'm not wrong. Or, yeah, you were there. So you probably heard Ursula von der Leyen saying this, and you probably know what I'm talking about. Let's just play that soundbite. We'll come back and we'll pick it up after that.
Our strategic cooperation should take place at the nexus of trade, trusted technology, and security, notably in respect of challenges posed by rival governance models. And therefore, I am very pleased that today Prime Minister Modi and I have agreed to establish an EU-India Trade and Technology Council to tackle key trade, economic and technological challenges.
Garima, trade, economy and technology, would you say that about summarizes the India-EU relationship?
Certainly. First of all, thank you, Viresh and Melissa. Lovely to speak to you both again. I would say trade, technology and security. Security is the word that Ms. von der Leyen used at her Raisina dialogue, and that really summarizes the EU-India relationship. Security is a relatively new element. Of course, it was a relationship based on trade for many, many years. But now you would see in the last few years under the Modi government, India has signed security MOUs with a number of European member states, which includes, defense technology cooperation, defense manufacturing cooperation, and broader security cooperation in general. This is something new. We've not seen that in the Europe-India context till now. But of course, now we have everybody from, German companies to Swedish companies and others working with India on defense issues, particularly on the question of manufacturing.
Bring in something, Melissa?
Oh, yeah, sure. So Sanatini Balak is saying that they're very excited about the Indian-German relationship and is saying that Germany is India's third largest trade partner. Is that correct? I just wanted to do a fact check and ask you about that.
Yeah, I think it is still correct. I haven't looked at the recent figures, but yeah, Germany is consistently one of the largest sort of trading partners that India has, and the topmost within the European Union, certainly, yes. And what's really interesting in the German relationship is we've seen a clear change from Chancellor Merkel's time, where the India-Germany relationship was good, not bad. I mean, they had, intergovernmental consultations and dialogues, but we've seen a real shift with both Chancellor Scholz as well as Minister Baerbock, who've taken a keen interest in India, have traveled to India a number of times and have discussed strategic issues like China and are keen on expanding Germany's Asian partnerships, particularly by investing in important countries like India.
You were talking about these security MOUs that is sort of new in the relationship between India and the EU. The third Modi term, do you think that there's going to be an increased push from India and from the EU as well to try and, take this to the next level?
So I think what will be different in the third Modi term is that we are moving from a Modi government to an NDA government, and we are now looking at a coalition. And working with coalition partners is a different environment than what the BJP was working previously under. And it was Prime Minister Modi and his political will and directives which, were driving this relationship. I think that on particularly issues like the EU-India free trade agreement, it might run into more complications because now we'll have to see who has the various ministries, the Ministry of Commerce. It will be perhaps a little bit difficult to move get internal compromises in India on issues like agriculture and tariffs. So this could lead to a few more complications, but it really depends on how Prime Minister Modi adapts to working in a coalition. And, the realities of coalition politics are quite different.
Gareen, can I also ask, and this is a question from Kushagra Bardwaj, and it's in the context of the free trade possibility, can we expect easier visa restrictions or visa access for Indians within the Schengen area?
I mean, that is an issue that India has been pushing for, people-to-people contacts and mobility within the European Union. And I'm not sure if this is true, but I've seen this statistic floating on Twitter that it is Indian applicants who have the highest number of Schengen visa rejections. And that's a real issue, I think, that needs to be addressed on the European side rather than the Indian side. Because if you say that you are interested in developing better ties with democratic partners like India and you want more people-to-people contacts, you cannot be creating such stringent regimes. For even Indian tourist visas, it's becoming really difficult at times. So I think that's an EU issue, and perhaps we'll see something after the EU elections, something to bring up on this side of the world.
Along the same lines, there's a number of migration and mobility agreements that India has signed with, I think, France, Germany, Finland, and Austria. What is it that covers, and who benefits from these agreements?
So an interesting trend, not just with these four countries, but a lot of other European member states, including Sweden, etc., India has been signing four types of agreements. They always include development, sort of migration and mobility, and security and defense. These are four elements that are crucial to India's European partnerships across the board. And migration and mobility is exactly needed at the member state level because still we negotiate, the FTA with the EU, which will include a clause on this. It is easier to get it done at the individual member state level. And of course, there's a lot of interest in European countries also to get migrants from India India. For example, Chancellor Scholz made it a key part of his visit when he went to India, saying we would like to attract not just white collar, but also other sort of skilled professionals, blue collar workers from India. And that's an interesting development. I think it's easier to get it done at the member state level rather than the EU.
And why is India pushing for this? Why is India keen to send skilled labor to other European nations?
I think it's more about remunerations, and the way that migration happens from India has changed over the years. You know, back in the 80s, 90s, you went abroad and you never went home. Now it's different. You go for a few years, for example, students who come, or medical professionals, and then they send remuneration back home, or they move back home after a few years. So I think it's not so much about why is the government pushing this, but I think there's rather a demand from the people's side of opening this avenue of cooperation. And of course, we've seen with Brexit, there's been an interest also, for example, with Indian students wanting to go and study in other European countries besides the UK.
Can I bring in a couple of things, but they're a slight pivot away? I mean,
let's bring them in. Let's see where we end up.
Okay, so one comment is that, this is a rather funny comment, Germany is not attractive to Indian students as there are no jobs, it's hard to learn German, and there's a recession in the West. So, ooh, burn. But here's another comment from Sachin. Russia has so much oil that India should sign a long-term deal. And I guess that brings in the question of how India-EU relations are impacted by the fact that India has a relationship with Russia, including a trade relationship with Russia that has involved the purchase of oil over the last couple of years since Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Yeah. I mean, first on the Germany comment, I did my PhD in Germany. I managed to find a job, which included me working in English. So it is still possible, but I agree overall that it is a tough market to crack. And on the Russia question, so of course, when the invasion of Ukraine first happened, this was a major stumbling block for EU-India ties. However, this has led to more interactions between Europe and India rather than less. I thought that it would lead to souring of relations, and it did happen to an extent, but it was a sort of wake-up call for many in Europe when they realized that even countries like India, they are finding it hard to bring on their side, are taking a rather nuanced position on the conflict. And we've seen a sort of greater outreach and understanding of India's relationship with Russia. And from the Indian side, we've seen an increasing interest in understanding Europe's relationship with China, because the parallels there are quite, easy to draw. India shares a border with China. I saw that you were just speaking to Michael about this relationship. Similarly, Europe and Russia share a border. However, India is okay with working with Russia, as Europeans were with working with China for a long time. So I've seen that there's been a positive trend of trying to understand India's long relationship with Russia, the sort of dependencies it has on the country, and the reasons why India cannot take a quick and dry, cut and dry position on the conflict. I think the Indian side has also been quite open in talking about these issues. And what I see now is a great point of convergence between Europeans and Indians is looking at the China-Russia alliance, how that is developing and taking shape in different parts of the world, because that will impact India as much as it does the Europeans. And that is an area of convergence, which is now being investigated more in this partnership.
Just to follow up on that, are we seeing minor adjustments then from the Indian policy perspective in terms of how, sort of medium-term, long-term purchase of Russian oil, and also sort of its approach to China as well in the context of all of this?
Mm-hmm. I mean, on the question of purchase of Russian oil, that's part of the larger conversation on the nature of oil markets and, drive prices being driven up. And even the US spokesman recently said that India's purchase actually helped in lowering oil prices across the world. And I mean, you can argue whether this was a sort of a short-minded decision, or was it part of a longer conversation? Who was buying the oil that was refined by India? So I think that's a more complicated conversation. But I do think that India is closely monitoring the Russia-China partnership. BRICS and what happened with the BRICS expansion is just one case with how this plays out, and is of has a direct impact on India and Indian foreign policy choices.
One of the cornerstones of the India-Russia relationship was, of course, the Russian weapon supply. I don't know what the present statistics are, but I think we were talking about anywhere between 60% to, I think, 70% of the Indian weapons armory comes from Russia, and there is a line that is constantly replaced from Russia. But given the outbreak of the Ukraine war and the sanctions that have been imposed on Russia, particularly when it comes to high technology, how threatened is that supply of weapons to India? And if it is indeed threatened, these security MOUs that India is signing with individual European nations, are they a way to counter that supply if it is threatened in the future? A very long question, I know, but please forgive me.
No, Biresh, you're absolutely right. This is true. If you look at the CIPRI report, which CIPRI compile interesting reports on arms purchase and trends, you would see that India's share of purchase of arms coming from Russia had been in decline even before Ukraine. This, of course, has been accelerated after the invasion of Ukraine. We've seen a number of statements from the Indian Defense Minister and other people on the need to diversify, on the need for India to find different partners. France's share in the total defense market in India has increased for about almost 200%. I think that's the CIPRI statistic. So certainly the move towards West is to counter this over-dependence on Russia. However, you would see in the breakdown that a number of traditional sort of weapons are still coming from Russia and would continue to do so in terms of, spares and parts and maintenance. But in terms of new technologies and next gen of weapons, that's where India is looking at partnerships with the West. And also to counter any such dependency from developing in the future, what they're doing is they're encouraging things like Make in India, where Western companies have to work with Indian companies to manufacture together in India to reduce this sort of dependency in the future. India certainly does not want to be in the position that it was caught in now with any other country. But you're right, the trend is to sort of move to the West when it comes to these demands.
What? Sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Are you sticking to military?
I was going to expand it a bit, but then let's take
why
a
don't you expand it and then so I don't want to pivot because we should stick to the military and then we can move on to this question. But Rajpal Singh is asking, what do you think about India-EU collaboration in space? And of course, this is gone in the context of just a few days ago. We saw the Chinese with their Chang'e 6 lunar landing on the far side of the moon. We've seen some collaboration between the Chinese and the European Space Agency. We see the collaboration, the continued collaboration on the International Space Station between Americans and Russians even. So there tends to be more collaboration in space, but it's quickly becoming an area where it's also getting more militarized as well. What do you know, Garima, about the India-EU collaboration, if there is any?
Unfortunately, not much. I mean, I don't know much about the India-EU collaboration in space. That's not an area that I follow. There have been some talks through the years of space being a new frontier where India and EU can work together. But you would see that the relationship is based on so many pillars that there are several areas that are covered, but progress is only made on some of them. So we haven't seen much, at least I am not aware of much collaboration in this space. There's much more focus on other things, for example, like maritime and cybersecurity.
What is the main driver of the EU's engagement with India, given that the EU also launched its own Indo-Pacific strategy? And I'm forgetting, and you will know the exact year, was this 2018 or was this earlier? Because I keep getting confused because you have France, Holland, and then you have Germany with their Indo-Pacific strategy. So I always forget which year when this happened. So what is the main driver?
I think it was 2022. So the main driver of the EU-India relationship that year, you're right, Biresh, is 2018 when the EU released its new India strategy, which really pivoted from looking at India simply as a trade partner and a development aid recipient to a key actor in the geopolitics of Asia and a key pillar that the EU wants to deepen its relationship with. This came at the same time the EU developed its China strategy and talked about the very famous partner-competitor-rival trilogy. Right. So I think it's no coincidence that at the same time when there were troubles in EU-China relations starting to brew, and you were seeing the EU take a sharper tone towards China when they realized that India is a key geopolitical partner that they've been ignoring for a while. And that is the basis of the EU-India relationship. So trade continues to be an important pillar, but also broader strategic partnership, working with India as a key partner in the Indo-Pacific, security and defense, as we just discussed at length, but also helping, sort of working with the global south, using India as a conduit. There are many, many areas now where the relationship finally has become multifaceted and not just dependent on trade.
You know, we were talking about elections in India. As it happens, the European Union itself is going to be having elections this week. Will that determine the future course of ties with India, or is that a separate track, irrespective of who is in power in European capitals here?
I think it will certainly have an impact, because political will has been a key driving factor in the EU-India relationship. We've seen the Modi-Jaishankar team on one hand, but also President von der Leyen, who's taken a keen interest in driving the India partnership forward. As you see, we just heard, she announced the in EU-India TTC at the Raisina dialogue. India is the only second country after the US the EU has a TTC with. So I think it is von der Leyen, her team, who have a very strategic vision when it comes to India. And this has really helped drive the partnership. I do think it will be impacted by who's in Brussels. We've seen that in the past as well with different HRVPs and whether they've had a sort of positive inclination of working with India or not. I really hope that this relationship has built a lot of momentum. I hope it continues in the future. But one point I would like to make vis-a-vis the Indian elections and Europe-India ties, being here in Brussels and also in other member states, I've often heard inane statements comparing India and China, saying India is becoming the new China in terms of democratic backsliding, et cetera, et cetera. I really hope that this election result sort of quells this conversation. While there are legitimate critiques of our system that can be discussed, however, a lot of the moral hand-wringing I've seen here in Europe derails the conversation, does not take it in a productive discussion. I think this particular election is important because we've seen the electorate give a mandate and also take that mandate away. And I really hope that sort of changes the track of conversations and the strange comparisons sometimes we see in Europe between India and China.
I think you'll have a bit of a challenge from me on this one, because while people do talk about this in Europe, it has never really derailed the relationship. The relationship carries on as normal. Ursula von der Leyen still goes to the Raisina dialogue, and there is engagement with India in various circles. It's not really derailed it, has it, the relationship?
I think it does derail it. I'm not talking about the bureaucrats or, for example, people in these positions who have to work with countries. I'm talking about members of parliament, for example, in the member states, MEPs, how the media covers it. I think it takes away nuance, and that's not what we want when we are dealing with a country that you say purportedly is an important partner. I think it would be important to have that conversation, but have it with nuance. And I've heard the India-China comparison so many times, thankfully not from von der Leyen.
I sort of fall between both of what you say, but it was definitely striking as someone who focuses a lot on China that there were hundreds of millions of people that could actually vote. Right, and that is the difference when you're looking at these two countries. I'm a little curious. Can I just throw in a question of mine, which is that the EU and China are at loggerheads right now about EVs, electric vehicles. They have been at loggerheads over the past about solar panels and the production of that. And so the question is about climate change and the climate change sort of renewable industry. Is there a place for India to sort of replace China? Because it's really put the EU in a very difficult position. Germany's solar industry absolutely got destroyed about a decade ago with the introduction of Chinese companies that were essentially subsidized by the state. And we are seeing a repeat of the same thing about to happen. A lot of people warning the EU about this. And I wonder whether there is a role for India and whether there are companies in India aware of this dynamic and stepping in to fill China's shoes.
Certainly, that is the hope that India has been saying, that it would like to attract companies thinking of moving out of China or looking at a China plus one model. It would also like to attract, for example, semiconductor manufacturing to happen in India. We've seen Apple have new operations in India, and there's certainly a pull from the Indian side to do this, but obviously, it's not easy in practice in terms of regulations, the regulatory environment in India, but also to set up this manufacturing from scratch. It does take a lot of skill development. So we are seeing conversations with from European companies as well, looking at India as a new destination, as is, for example, the case with Thailand, Vietnam, and other places in Asia. However, I do feel like talking to European companies, particularly German companies, the interest in working in China or manufacturing in China, staying there, is still quite high. I think it's more of a political conversation where you're talking about shifting to other areas, but a lot of businesses seem only to be looking at the short-term picture and are quite happy, for example, being there and also catering to the Chinese market.
Pardon me for asking this provocative question. Do forgive me if it is provocative. But what does India bring to the table when it comes to ties with the EU, given that you yourself have said when it comes to the China Plus model, well, it hasn't really worked out as yet with India. Nobody is leaving China in droves to come to Indian shores to invest. In fact, if people are leaving, they are trying to go to Vietnam and Malaysia and Indonesia, which have more friendly policies, and this is one of the things that India needs to work on. So that is not happening. India is trying to buy European weaponry. The Europeans aren't trying to buy Indian weaponry the way the Philippines has bought Indian missiles, for example. So what is India bringing to the table here beyond potential?
Interesting that you frame this way, Biresh, because you said India is buying from Europe. That's the draw, right? It's a market. They want to sell their weapons companies, etc., somewhere. So the draw of the Indian market is still pretty big. There are a number of European companies that are investing in India. I mean, of course, if we look at the lens of who's moving away from China to India, it's a small one, although Siemens just announced a huge, when Chancellor Scholz went to India, a huge investment increases in India. So, of course, the draw of the market is there. India is a key market also for the defense industry and sectors. I mean, talk to the French and they would tell you the importance of India right there. But also, I think in terms of geopolitical partnerships in the Indo-Pacific, a lot of European countries have realized that they've focused only on China and not other partners. And that doesn't say that India is the only important country, but it is certainly one of the important players that they're investing in the region. In terms of skills and people-to-people contacts, I mean, attracting people from India to work in Europe, that's a key issue as well. But also, I think in terms of who are your important partners, when it came to the issue of Ukraine and building coalitions of support around Ukraine, you need countries like India to work with other countries in the Global South. We saw that with the G20, India convening the Global South Summit, where the way India dealt with the diplomacy post-Ukraine was actually lauded by countries like South Africa and others who thought that they worked well in resisting Western pressures. So I do think that there are many areas where Europe is seeing India as an important partner worth investing into. Maybe not as much as China yet, but perhaps that will change.
Early days.
We don't know.
Early days. Can I expand this to another partner, the United States? And the reason I try to do that is because, you know, relations between Europe and the United States, I'm always trying to figure out where we are, because we keep talking about strategic autonomy and the Europeans doing their own thing, independent of the United States, a third pillar, if you like, in world politics. Is it important how the European Union-US relationship plays out, and will that have an impact on ties between the EU and India?
I mean, I come from a transatlantic organization, so I know that the importance of transatlantic ties is key for a lot of European member states. The US-India relationship, US-Europe relationship is a defining one, but I do think that has impacted how Europe works with India as well. I don't think it's a coincidence that the TTC, for example, was created with the US and India both. I do think that also on questions of the Indo-Pacific, there is a certain push from the US for Europeans and Indians to work together. I mean, we at GMF run a trilateral between Europe, US, and India, and we've seen these conversations unfold firsthand. So I do think that a lot of Europe's interest in the Indo-Pacific region is sort of driven by the US interest in the region as well. It sort of helps it, although they are competitive actors in certain areas as well. But of course, I think the transatlantic relationship will be shaped by the next election, which I hope you guys will cover as well in the US.
Don't tell us about elections.
Comes in the White House.
This election, yeah, we have been on our toes. We had Mexico, South Africa. We have the European Union elections coming up. Rest assured, we will be covering it. I think we'll leave it there for the moment, Garima. We've stretched our time with you, and you've been very patient with us. Thanks so much for being patient with us and joining us from Brussels. We look forward to the next conversation with you on India-EU ties.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Garima.
Certainly. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Bye.
I just wanted to, before we move on, sorry, I know
go ahead.
Garima was talking about the Schengen visa issue and how it's, these really incredible hurdles for Indian citizens to get Schengen visas. And I've just gone through a few stats. Apparently in the year 2022, India had the second highest rate of Schengen visa rejections. Algerian nationals were the most rejected. And according to the Economic Times, Estonia, Malta and Slovenia rejected the most number of Schengen visa applications from India, but Germany, Italy and Hungary accepted the most. So some interesting stats there.
That is actually fascinating. I did not know that the Algerians were the most rejected and we were the Indians. I say we, I am Indian, the second most rejected group. That is interesting. Let's expand this because we want to talk about the third region that we had promised at the outset, and Garima was talking a bit about that, the United States, because besides the EU, the US looms large when it comes to India's foreign relations. The US and India have a global strategic partnership. To help us unpack that, I'm joined now, waiting very patiently on the line, Manoj Joshi from Delhi. He is with the Observer Research Foundation. Manoj, thank you so much for making the time just a day after a very hectic day India has seen, and we continue to see that today as well. I'm going to come to you, but before that, let's just play a soundbite from President Joe Biden. This is something that Joe Biden said last year when Narendra Modi was in the United States on a state visit. Let's just play that soundbite and pick up on that after that with you, Manoj.
A partnership that is among the most consequential in the world, that is stronger, closer, and more dynamic than any time in history.
Manoj, President Biden, I think, also defined it as the, quote, defining partnership of the 21st century. Is this partnership only going to get stronger in a third Modi term?
I think so. I think the trends that have brought India and the United States closer to each other, I don't see anything there which could be a problem. Meaning, if you look at the India-US relationship since 1950, you can very clearly identify the points where the problems occurred. For example, the whole issue of the Cold War, the US focus on Russia, then Pakistan coming into the picture, then from 1980 onward, China coming into the picture. I would say from the mid-70s, China coming into the picture. But today, the situation has changed. Today, the United States needs India for balancing China, just as India needs the United States for the same purpose. So there is a congruence of geopolitical interests between the two sides. And along with that is the fact that the Indian economy, the Indian economy is very West-oriented, meaning it's our trade with United States is one of the few trades where we actually export more than we import.
Right.
And most of the other countries, it's the other way around. So there are certain advantages for us.
I just want to share some comments. There's a lot of people with strong opinions about the U.S.-India or India-U.S. relationship. Achut Mohan is saying that the U.S.-India relationship matters most to India, but the problem is that the U.S. is the master of backstabbing people whenever they want, to whomever they please. So very skeptical we are. And then from Anupam, also saying India should focus on the relationship with Russia and China. The U.S. has its domestic problems, and they cannot be a good partner. So we have a very skeptical bunch of people in chat.
Has India made the wrong choice, Manoj?
No, not at all. As I said, there is a geopolitical congruence. So we have good ties with Russia, but if you look at the economic ties before this whole oil business came up, our ties were anemic. I think we traded $10 billion or something like that. So Russia was okay, geopolitically fine, not an issue. But then geopolitically today, Russia is getting more closely aligned to China. Our geopolitical problem in the near future, because our entire border with China is disputed, I don't see in the short term India and China becoming very friendly. But as far as the United States is concerned, we happen to be on the right side of the United States at this stage. As I said earlier, there were issues, Afghanistan, Pakistan, the Soviet Union, etc.
Right.
Now, I think those people who are skeptical, I think they have a point about United States backstabbing, and certainly what they have to understand is that there is a huge asymmetry in the relationship. The United States is a global power, okay? And it has global interests. And it has been very ruthless in pushing itself, its global hegemony, if I may put it that way, in a very ruthless fashion. So yes, the United States can ditch you tomorrow.
Right.
There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. Can I just pick you up on that point of geopolitical congruence and this balancing China argument? I just want to understand the argument here. How does the United States assume or expect India to counterbalance China when since 2020 we have in effect an active border with China and India is struggling to essentially man it and bring back the territories that Indian soldiers could patrol to? So how does the United States expect that India will counterbalance China when it's becoming difficult to manage the border?
Well, one thing I'll tell you is that the border in 2020, India was taken by surprise. No territory in that sense has been occupied. What has happened is that there are about 5 or 6 places in eastern Ladakh where our claims overlapped, the Indian and the Chinese claims. And we used to, by common consent, patrol that area. So what the Chinese did was they effectively blockaded us. So I'm deliberately using the word blockade. So what happened is that they blockaded us from patrolling where we used to patrol.
Correct.
So it's in that sense, territorially, it's fairly minor. But what it has done is that it has led to the complete reorientation of the Indian army and the Indian military to face China. Earlier, it was facing Pakistan.
Right.
Now I would say the center of gravity is more towards China, and that's on the land border.
Right.
Then there is a whole separate set of issues which relate to the Indian Ocean, where again we are close to the United States. We also occupy a very strategic position in the Indian Ocean.
Yeah, but then here also, I'm sorry to cut you short, sir, but here also Chinese naval superiority trumps Indian naval superiority purely in terms of tonnage of ships. It is far greater than what the Indian Navy can provide. And therefore, I'm asking you, what is the expectation here from India? How will India counterbalance China?
Well, this is the whole point. As far as you are right about the tonnage and the size of the Chinese Navy, but that only matters in the Western Pacific. in the Indian Ocean, the Indian Navy is far superior to whatever the Chinese have. And geographically also, as I was trying to tell you, we jut out into the Indian Ocean 2,000 kilometers. Okay, the key sea routes pass by India.
Right.
If you have to go to Malacca, India dominates the Malacca Straits. See? India is close to the Sunda Straits, where that's the other point of ingress from the Pacific Ocean to the Indian Ocean. So India has a geographical advantage in the Indian Ocean. The Chinese right now have virtually very, very minor deployments in the Indian Ocean. So what the United States really wants is that India does a lot of self-strengthening. That is, by the time we have a Chinese Navy, maybe 2, 3, 4 aircraft carriers which are able to enter the Indian Ocean, by that time, India will also have an effective counter. And as it is, the US Navy is also very strongly entrenched in the Indian Ocean. They're located in the base of Diego Garcia, right in the middle of the ocean. Plus, they have very strong bases in the Persian Gulf area. So what I'm trying to get at is that the Chinese Navy may have size, but in the Indian Ocean, I don't think for the next 2 decades, they can kind of exert power in any kind of a way.
Well, just to piggyback off of that, there's a question from the chat from Kushagra Bharadwaj asking, what do you think India needs to do more with the U.S. in the context of the Quad?
Well, I think what has happened with the Quad, before this, we should, when you had asked your first question about US and India and our common interests, at the same time, don't forget that while ostensibly we call ourselves partners, but then still there are major nuances. After all, India is one of the major oil traders with Russia. India is trying to develop the port of Chabahar in Iran. So it's not as though we are tailing the United States. We are not military allies. We are not treaty allies of the United States. Both of us are in it for ourselves. So both of us are in it for ourselves in that sense. And this is something which we made clear in the Quad. There was a time when the Quad used to be spoken of as a potential military alliance. But now I think people are very clear. It has no context. It's basically into economic integration, resilience, emerging technologies, healthcare, humanitarian relief, etc.
Yeah, all that
because
talk of
for the
Asian
military
NATO
part of it
has been cast aside.
No, that's aside, and for the military part of it, the United States has created the AUKUS, with UK and Australia,
but not including India.
Not including. That's what I'm trying to get at. But that's because India doesn't want to be there.
Okay.
And the second alliance that people are now talking of is what is called the Squad.
Yeah.
That is Japan, Philippines, United States, and Australia. So what I'm saying is the military part of it, India is not part of it. In any case, what the Indians want is to focus in the Indian Ocean and protection of the Indian maritime interests. We have India has indicated no desire to play any kind of a major role. Even there, of course, we have in the last, I would say, year, developed close ties with the Philippines.
Right.
Right, yeah. We're selling them BrahMos missiles, for example.
Yes.
Right.
And so what I'm trying to say is that India does sort of play a role, but a minor role. Last year we had the first India-ASEAN maritime exercise. This is the first maritime exercise between the ASEAN and India. And we have maritime relations with the other countries, Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, separately.
Right. We'll leave it there for the time being, Manoj. We can talk a lot more, but we'll leave it there for the moment. Thanks so much for joining us and making time at a very exciting time in India, at a time of new government formation potentially. Thanks so much for talking to us today, Manoj.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Right. I think this is just the right time to check on the poll because,
yes,
Cherry, you were posting
more than an hour, right?
You've closed it, right?
Yeah,
I'm just trying to follow
I
this.
just closed it right now.
So where are we with the poll? Who is saying what?
We have 486 votes.
Okay.
Most people, which is actually less than half, 45%. Oh, wait, sorry. The poll question, I'll repeat again.
Yeah.
What relationship matters most to India? 45% vote that India-US relationship matter the most. 32% vote for India-Russia. 15% vote for India-China. And 7% vote for India-EU. So.
This is so telling. This is so telling that... what did I say? India-US and India-Russia. This is going to be the most interesting, and that's where the thing is split. I mean, just 7% for India-EU and 15% still with India-China, despite having an active border. I found this fascinating.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, I wonder how our guests would, what they would say to those.
Maybe we do another news desk and bring this poll and start the chat with that.
Yeah.
I'd be very interested, very curious to look at that. Right. Let's just. I think we've covered all we can for the moment. This is not the final word on these relationships, but I think overall it's just been a great conversation. I've quite enjoyed it with the. I don't know what you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think as an American and following the way the news is presented in the United States, so much of the focus is on U.S.-China relations. And I think what this talk has really underscored is that, frankly, I think the U.S. media should focus a bit more on the U.S.-India relations because it looks like it's going to be only an increasing relationship, a closer relationship that's going to be super important, both economically, politically, and geopolitically.
Yeah.
Consequential relationship. Jared, any words to add?
Not really. I think I can agree with the same. I mean, yeah, when we're sort of talking about this particular region, everyone sort of goes directly to relations with China, but India very quickly gets, well, not necessarily forgotten, but it's probably not given as much consideration and importance as it should, and that definitely ties in with what you were saying.
Shirley, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting when we talk about how Modi's win would affect the foreign relations. We talk about how politicians are making the decisions, but in the chat, for example, many people are concerned about how, for example, how hard it is to get visas to go to Germany or to the EU or to the US. And this statistic that you were showing us was really surprising and interesting. And I think this is a very interesting direction to go into as well.
I'm quite curious as to how this will all pan out with the coalition government, how assertive this foreign policy will be, and how much and how quickly can they get things done, especially when it comes to the relationship with the EU, given that the EU is also having an election starting tomorrow, correct?
Yeah.
Over the next 3 days.
I mean, it's with these stats that I was just talking about, they are from 2 years ago, so I'd be interested to see if they might have changed at all in that time. Who knows? They might have done.
All right. Let's leave it here for the time being. Thanks so much to everybody who voted in the poll question, who sent us your comments and questions. Hopefully we were able to get as many. We tried to get as many of them as possible. You can never get everything in there, but we see you, and I think Cherry and Jared were doing a great job trying to respond to the concerns that were being raised. We'll leave it here for the moment, and we're back again next week, right?
Yeah. Every week this discussion takes place, so check the community tab on the YouTube website and you'll see what the subject will be. We post it about 24 hours before the chat and the live stream.
We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.